This is You and Yours, introduced by John Edmunds. Hello. Mrs. Sheila Bellamy writes to us from the National Office of the Citizens Advice Bureau in London.
Many of the problems and queries that come to You and Yours could be dealt with by Citizens Advice Bureaus. They're situated in most cities and market towns. And should you ever wish to refer listeners with problems to their nearest bureau, of which there are 518 in the United Kingdom, the addresses and hours of opening can be obtained from town halls, public libraries and post offices. Many of the bureaus in rural areas deal with the greater volume of their inquiries by telephone. Telephone numbers are listed under Citizens Advice Bureau in local directories. Last year we received over 1 million inquiries. The subjects included family and personal matters, housing, social security, landlord and tenant, consumer complaints, hire purchase and credit buying.
And this is a suitable time to remind you that we enjoy receiving and reading your letters for what's on your mind, but we are chiefly interested in letters which are of sufficiently general interest and importance to use in You and Yours. Unfortunately, we've not the time, staff or facilities to answer specific queries unless they arise directly from the programme. So don't forget the Citizens Advice Bureau in your area. Health centres have been one of the goals of the Health Service since it was started in 1948, but they're still few and far between. Only 45 were opened up until 1967, and this scarcity is partly because doctors have been suspicious of putting themselves in the hands of the local authorities who put up the premises and provide some of the services for this new kind of surgery. The concept behind the health centre is that by grouping doctors and local authority health and welfare services, district nurses for example, on the same site, a more efficient service is offered to the public. St James's Health Centre at Walthamstow in East London has now been open for 18 months. We sent Joan York along to see how doctors and patients there liked it.
7 doctors have their surgeries in this health centre, the sort of building and set-up which doctors all over the country have been dreaming about for years, ever since the health service began. How was it, I asked one of them, that this particular centre came to be planned, built and opened 18 months ago?
I think it was very much a joint effort. At very much the same time, a need arose for the local authority to rebuild one of its infant welfare clinics in the area, and at much the same time the doctors in the immediate area started to press for a health centre as such, and I suppose the two of them worked very much hand in hand. The pressure was really on both ends, and I must say from the point of view of the doctors that we had extreme cooperation from the local authority in the development of the centre.
Why did you all get together to press for it, though? How did this arise?
Basically, all of us were very keen on the political and social idea of a health centre. And the other point is that most of our premises were very run down. We were very dissatisfied with the standard of medicine we were practicing insofar as the premises and the conditions were very poor.
The building was put up and paid for by the local authority. They used part of it for child welfare and other clinics, offices for social workers, a centre for the district nurses, who also act as staff for the doctors, and then they rent out the rest of it to the doctors. It's a most attractive, welcoming building, except oddly enough for the waiting room, which is rather institutional, pretty noisy as you'll hear, and rather full of people sitting in straight rows. But the first patient I talked to preferred the centre to the single doctor's surgery.
I would say that it's much better really than the old-time doctor, because here you've got nurses here that can do everything for you, whereas like they used to send you to the hospital, it could only be a small thing. They send you to a hospital, it can only be a small thing, and yet here they can do it on the spot.
Well, that's because they have a small operating theatre in the centre. The next patient, though, hadn't really liked the change.
I sooner have the old-time doctor.
Which one?
Definitely.
Why is that now?
Well, you go in your turn.
Mm.
But you don't here because they jump up and down. They think you...
Do you always see the doctor you want to see, do you, here?
Or don't come till I do. I
What-
made this appointment last Thursday.
A few of the patients complained to me about the appointment system, which seemed to them complicated and sometimes unfair, and the staff did say that they're worried about it, trying to alter it and to improve the waiting area and make it more comfortable and more private. I managed to get one of the 4 receptionists on duty, Mrs. Morris, away from her very busy desk for a few moments to ask her about her reactions.
Well, I worked 3.5 years for a doctor in an ordinary practice, and then we came into the health centre. I feel it's very difficult for patients to understand that the doctors have got so much more work to do in a health centre, and I find that people are demanding the same attention that they had from the old type surgeries in the new health centre, but it's not possible to give exactly the same service, the quite so personal service that we used to give.
Why is the doctor busier?
People like to attend a new health centre. They like to attend more often. The surroundings, it's better, it's warmer.
Yeah.
We used to have a tea machine, but people were coming in for tea. The tea machine has now been removed.
But why is it that the sort of feeling, the personal feeling, you think has gone between
Because
the
you're
doctor and the
so
patient?
much more overworked. It's not so much between the doctor and the patient as the receptionist and the patient. You haven't got the time for the quiet, how's Uncle Jim, and, you know, which we used to have.
Mm.
You're interrupted so many times by the phone, which you sort of continually take. You're halfway through a conversation or a sentence with a patient, you're interrupted once, you try and resume your conversation again, you're interrupted again, and I find the patient at the desk does resent this. Plus, they don't feel they've got quite so much privacy as they had in the old reception, where they was only speaking to you and you was only dealing with them.
But when the patient gets to the doctor, there's no doubt that from the doctor's point of view, he can work more efficiently and get other help more easily than he used to when in practice on his own. One of them explained it to me in this way.
Well, previously I was working in complete isolation from all other sections of the health service. It's true that we wrote letters to hospitals and occasionally saw a hospital consultant, but we seldom saw the district nurses, seldom saw we saw the midwives occasionally. That was the greatest extent of our cooperation. The medical officer of health was a very remote figure who we seldom came in contact with. Health visitors, social workers, they were people who we just heard about. But now, of course, we work with these people every day and we share our problems with them. We discuss our problems with them over tea break, and we have a much closer contact in the interest of the patients with all other sections of the health service.
So you enjoy it, in fact, yourself, do you?
Yes.
More
yes,
than you did?
Certainly, yes,
Yeah.
It's fine. And of course we can do more for the patients. You don't get so much frustration. You get what I think the technical boys call job satisfaction.
Sounds odd that a doctor needs job satisfaction, but many GPs have for some time felt like frustrated clerks signing medical certificates all day. Here they don't. And of course you'll have noticed that they keep saying that as a result of all this they can do more for the patient. I pressed the first doctor I spoke to give me an example.
For the chap who comes in unwell, first of all, there are better facilities for examination. For example, I have always the use of at least 2 consulting rooms during a consulting session, so that I have perfect liberty and freedom and time to send the patient into the next consulting room, tell them to get undressed, and then I'll come in and examine them at leisure, rather than being worried about the time he's going to spend in getting undressed and so on. And then again, I can do certain simple pathology here. I can, for example, estimate his hemoglobin, once again on the spot. If I suspect he has some heart trouble, I can do an electrocardiogram on the spot and I'll have the result immediately. And that's the sort of thing I mean by doing more per patient.
Presumably you can also refer him to the welfare officer who is here on the spot.
This is the other thing. For example, the patient that comes along and says they are unwell, it may be they're unwell because they're worried about money. Again, I may well send him to one of our social workers. He, again, may have some psychological difficulties, and very often one can control this with follow-up by one of the mental social workers who also comes into the clinic, and he may well take over a patient for perhaps a certain amount of superficial psychotherapy and support.
Obviously the patient does gain a lot, but there's one thing it seems to me he risks losing, and that is the personal relationship with his GP, which is important to many people. The administrator for the centre, Charles Jordan, telling me about the appointment system, put it this way.
We still have today patients who come in and say, well, I want to see a particular doctor as opposed to seeing any doctor, where we try to point out to the patient that that particular doctor may not be too busy to see the patient, but we always try to give an appointment to the patient with the doctor of that patient's choice.
But on the whole, they do have to go from one doctor to another doctor, do they?
Well, on the whole, yes, because with an appointment system, it will be ludicrous to give, say, 50 appointments to one doctor when another only has about 10 appointments. So what we try to do is to even up the appointments over all the doctors practicing. Therefore, we try to say, well, if one doctor has 30 appointments for a particular morning, we try and make sure that all the doctors in that group has about 30 appointments.
But you do find that some patients object to this.
Some patients object to this, and in the end, you have got to give the patient the benefit, because that doctor is committed to seeing that patient. And we also try to give the patient an appointment with the doctor that that patient wants to see.
The fact is that more patients have come to the health centre than went to the 7 doctors individually, because it's attractive, warm, central, and there's a doctor there at almost any time of the day, and you don't have to trek on to the hospital for comparatively minor treatment. These advantages for many people are more important than the loss of personal contact with your doctor. The only question I would ask is whether it isn't possible to have that as well.
Joan York on health centres. The other day we got a letter from a listener asking whether schools could force parents to get full school uniform for their children. We weren't sure of the answer, so we sent Anne Haino to find out from Maurice Roberts of the Inner London Education Authority. Can a head teacher force a child to wear school uniform?
It is usually the case that the governors of a secondary school will approve a list of items of school uniform, and these are then incorporated in the school rules, which parents generally sign that they will observe and are expected to observe. No head teacher would wish to have an eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation about school uniform. He would wish to get round it in one way or another if there was real difficulty at home or if there was strong objection made. This is always a matter for consultation and discussion between the parents and headmaster if there is any difficulty. This is a general right of the discipline of the school, which is given to head teachers.
What in fact would happen if a parent refused to buy a school uniform for his child?
If I were the headmaster, my immediate reaction would be to invite the parent to come up and see me and to talk things over, because generally this is a case of financial difficulty, and sometimes this can be overcome by the payment of a grant. Occasionally a parent, although suffering some hardship, will be ineligible for a grant, but there may be other means within the school where a child can be helped, perhaps from existing stock which may be held, perhaps from a voluntary fund of some kind which is available.
But supposing a parent still refused on principle, what would happen? Could the child be expelled?
I do not think this is the case. There is no statutory requirement for children to wear uniform. It is a matter for cooperation between the school and the parent and parental support. After all, most parents do like uniform to be worn, and they're very anxious for their children to wear it. And it's only very rarely do we find that objection is taken, and then it is usually on this ground of cost and hardship.
I wonder whether you saw the pictures in the press earlier this week of new uniforms designed for the Royal Navy. Of course, school uniforms are much less standardised, but nevertheless it does seem, and this is confirmed by many of your letters to this programme, that little effort is made to make them fashionable or even very practical. But Betty German, who has 3 children of her own, recently attended a fashion show given by a firm that had been making school uniforms since 1919. I asked her whether she'd seen anything revolutionary.
Well, I thought so. I thought it was a new approach. You've got this generation's reaction against the sort of clothes they're expected to wear. You've got the raising the school leaving age. And, of course, right this moment you have this massive reorganisation of secondary schools. And so obviously it's a good idea to have a rethink on the whole question of uniforms, what they're going to wear.
Are they using new materials at all?
Yes, to some extent. They are having washable blazers, which personally I thought was an excellent idea, because they will chuck their school dinners down the front, and you have this terrible rush at half-term to get them to the cleaners.
Yeah, especially if the dinner was dropped down at the beginning of January. It's a long time to wait till half term.
Yeah, very nasty.
What about design? Is there anything new for boys' uniforms?
Oh, yes, quite a lot. You've got the traditional blazer, and there's an interesting jacket with a collar, different collar, and a long body, 4 buttons, rather nice. And then something I thought was very new, very interesting, is the battle blouse. Lots of pockets, button cuff, lots of room to stuff things in.
Well, that sounds extremely practical, because blazers or any kind of jacket always get to look very tatty after a while, whereas a battle blouse wouldn't, I should think.
Yes, I should think it would take an enormous amount more wear. Yeah. They're also, because I'm sure you know about this reaction against the wearing of jeans at school,
yes.
They're applying the jean styling to normal trousers, traditional fabrics, so that I should think both sides were satisfied. Nice flared legs.
Compromise, yes.
Compromise, yes.
But are boys still stuck with collars and ties?
Unfortunately, yes. I would have thought by now you would have gone over either to a woolly or to a polo-necked shirt, which would cut out this very stiff look.
Seems unnecessary, doesn't it? After all, as soon as they're students, they abandon collars and ties.
Yes, yes, the first thing they do. Another thing they had really got round, I'm sure you know this, another argument that goes on is the question of the gabardine coat.
Yes.
And any child that can manage to escape to an anorak does this. And they have made a longer anorak, which means that instead of having the lower part all exposed and cold, you have an anorak with a hood and big pockets and all these things. But it's a bit longer. It gives you just that extra protection.
Yes. What about girls, then? Are they going to be allowed to look a little more feminine?
No. I felt girls came off very much rough end. If you think of these two ideas, the narrow cut of a jeans trouser, and then you put on the top of it a battle blouse, which, of course, obviously stops at the waist, literally cuts them in half.
Yes.
This is most unkind.
From the back view, you mean?
From the back view, yes, definitely. Not at all a good idea.
Especially for girls going through the puppy fat stage.
Yes, it is unkind, definitely. But one thing I did really like, I think perhaps they weren't right on the mark with this, and this is that a jacket, which after all is only part of uniform when you have this large embroidered badge on it, they have the idea to replace the embroidered badge with a fob bearing, of course, the arms of the school. And this fob is on a ribbon which hangs outside the pocket when you go to school and tucks into the pocket when you're at, some sort of leisure, whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
In effect, turning the thing into a leisure jacket.
Very ingenious, except that it sounds as though it would be a great temptation to somebody sitting next to you to yank it off.
Oh, I'm quite sure you looked at it and thought, will it last half an hour, 2 days? Then it's lost. This awful business of chasing around looking for your school badge, which you'd lost.
You don't sound very enthusiastic about these new ideas.
Oh, I am. I really think that this is going to the child and saying, let's have some practical things. Let's have the sort of things you like. Let's not have this you must wear, which, of course, they don't. They react against it. Definitely.
Lots of our listening mums, I think, will be very interested in the washable blazers. Are these actually on the market, or will they be available soon?
Oh, yes. This is part of this whole new thinking, but this basically is a standard blazer, excepting that you have it in washable fabric, and it's about time.
So that doesn't depend upon headmasters accepting the new designs?
Not at all, not at all.
If you were listening to It's Your Line last Tuesday evening, you'd have realised that keeping a dog is a very serious business. Perhaps we're no longer a nation of shopkeepers, but we're certainly a nation of pet lovers. For dogs and their owners, the big day of the year is tomorrow, when Crufts opens. One of the visitors will be Dr. Jim Corbin, who describes himself as chef to America's doggy millions, and more formally as an animal nutritionist. Derek Cooper went down to Battersea Dogs Home, where he found Dr. Jim in close consultation with Commander Benjamin Knight, Secretary of Battersea Home. Putting a question which is in many of our minds, he asked if there really was a place for the dog in today's big cities.
Well, we think that it's ideal to keep dogs in towns for several reasons. To begin with, when dogs are generally kept, it is to replace some love that is otherwise unavailable. For example, We find that dogs are one of the greatest assets to developing children. Frequently in a home where the parents have to work or where there's another problem, the children may feel unloved, but never if they have a pet, because a pet does not reject them. And when a dog is kept in town, he needs remarkably little exercise if he is not overfed and can do very well indeed.
Well, I don't know about that. I think whether Commander Knight will agree with me or not, I don't know, but I think in London we have a terrible problem of foul pavements, don't we?
Utopia, of course, in training people to make their dogs vacate themselves in the proper place is much harder than training the dog to do it. It's one of the easiest things to train a dog to do.
How do you manage in New York and big American cities?
In many places there are large areas that are restricted to dogs, so it's a place where dogs can go. But even better than that is to train the dogs to paper in the apartments, so the dogs will go on the paper. And then each day these papers can be rolled up 2 or 3 times during the day, put in the garbage, and then hauled away by the collector. So there's no problem there.
What basically would you say is the difference between the American attitude to the dog and the British attitude?
In America, the dogs are restricted more to the apartments than they are in England. I notice as we go around the countryside that many English keep their dogs and their children with them on long walks, and they apparently go out every day. We know that that extensive exercise is not necessary in America, and because of the problems of encountering stray dogs which might start fights sometimes, most of our dogs do remain on the property for the most part.
Well, this is very revolutionary, and it strikes me as being unusual because we have a dog, and I would feel very upset if one member of the family didn't take him for a long walk every day.
Yes, I think perhaps the Englishman is more prone to a liver than the American. I don't know. The exercises.
You mean it's better for the owner than for the dog?
Yes. I really don't know. I do honestly think people ought to get out. And, of course, I don't wish to be rude to my guest, the famous Dr. Jim Corbin. But it's known in this country that the American will never walk round the block if he can drive.
You're going to 2 very different locations. On Friday you're off to Crufts. Here you are today in the right at the other end of the scale with the waifs and strays in the Battersea Dogs Home. How do the 2 things correlate, do you think, the posh aristocracy of the dog world and the poor pathetic things that are brought in here?
Well, you know, the dog does not realize that he has this extensive pedigree.
It's true.
And both receive about the same amount of love from their owners. And both can contribute a lot to mankind's stability in the home.
Now, very brief what's on your mind today. First of all, an old-age pensioner living in Hockley, Essex, who writes to protest about yet another price increase.
I've just heard that the price of milk is to be once more increased in the near future. I'm all in favour of the farmer getting a fair price, but must protest against the stupidity and waste of heaven knows how many thousands of pounds on stressing the value of milk. We all know it's an essential part of healthy, everyday diet. If these advertising campaigns continue, I'm wondering how long it will be before I and others are drinking water.
Wouldn't economists say that advertising causes increased consumption, which brings the price down? Mrs. D.F. Penkier, Wimbledon, has another cause for complaint.
I discovered a new racket today. When I went to get my usual 1 pint of milk from a general shop, I was given a plastic container and told it was 6.5 pence instead of 5.5 pence, silver top. I said I wanted a pint bottle of milk and was told that was what I'd get, like it or not. I was also informed that the actual price of milk hadn't gone up, but one had to pay for the container, although it wasn't returnable. Some time ago, when a changeover was discussed, we were told that it would cost less to supply milk in these plastic bottles than to supply and return and wash glass ones. We were never told we'd have to pay for them, and why should we, when one thinks of what must be saved in washing them alone?
Yes, indeed. Well, short what's on your mind today. We shall be back again without what's on your mind at all tomorrow, and so at our later time of 12:10.